It was during the hymn before the tea raffle that the scream came. Not a theatrical wail, but a short, sharp gasp, the kind that cuts through a village hall like a dropped saucer. The congregation turned in a rustling chorus of tweed and polyester to see Mrs. Alma Penrose, recently widowed and long admired for her resilience, clutching at the neckline of her coat. Her lips quivered. "It's gone," she breathed, with the tragic solemnity usually reserved for fainting fits and misdelivered telegrams. "My brooch. My grandmother's." For a moment there was respectful silence. Then the uproar began. "I saw it this morning on her lapel. It had a green stone, didn't it? I heard she took it out of the safe for the fete. Foolish, really. Well, I wouldn't leave anything valuable near the jam judging table. People get possessive about rhubarb. I'm sure I saw Beryl looking a bit close at it. Very close. Practically sniffing it. Could have been that girl from the WI committee, the one with the unfortunate fringe. She only screamed because she realized the mayor's raffle ticket got pulled. Not hers, Inspector Purbright, who had arrived 5 minutes prior to the scream and precisely 1 minute before the raffle commenced, stood near the trestle table laden with sponge cakes and marzipan monstrosities. His eyes, calm as a librarian's on a slow Tuesday, scanned the crowd, not for suspects, but for something odder. He noticed, half tucked behind the hymn board, a folded crocheted napkin, distinctly out of place amidst the potted ferns and bunting. The number displayed on the board read 128. The next hymn was 94. No one had noticed the discrepancy. Purbright didn't comment on it. Sergeant Love, arriving slightly winded from an enthusiastic chase after a runaway raffle booklet outside, panted to his superior. "Sir, what's happened?" "A theft, it seems," Purbright said, gently brushing icing sugar from his sleeve, "though I dare say it will take on dimensions far exceeding the value of the brooch. Is the hall secure?" "Love, this is Flaxborough. If the brooch is still in the building, it's likely wedged beneath a custard tart or in someone's handbag, mistaken for a napkin. Still, we should question the raffle team. Those ladies are formidable." "Indeed," Purbright mused, his gaze drifting back to the hymn board. "But not always forthright. There's more concealment in church halls than most crime scenes." Word spread faster than chutney on a hot scone. Within minutes, the scandal of the missing brooch had eclipsed the prize gooseberry preserve and the unfortunate incident of the exploding soda siphon in the beverages corner. A man from the Model Railway Society offered to seal the exits. "Just in case the culprit attempts a dash," he muttered, his tone suggesting he wouldn't mind seeing some action with the emergency fire door. Alma Penrose was led to a chair and revived with tea laced with disapproval. Her niece, a bespectacled girl with an Arctic stare, was already compiling a mental list of suspects based on grudges spanning back to 1983 Garden Club AGM. "Auntie showed that brooch off just before the judging," she said firmly, "and I saw Mrs. Carruthers look at it like she was planning a heist. She collects antique buttons, you know. That's practically the same thing by now. The town council's deputy chair, a man with a mustache that implied authority but wobbled under scrutiny, had assumed the role of unofficial marshal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he intoned, tapping a cake knife against the microphone stand, "we must remain calm. The item will no doubt be recovered promptly." It was not. Purbright walked slowly along the side of the hall, hands behind his back, pausing occasionally by coat racks and side tables. His progress was that of someone examining not the crime, but the staging. The placement of chairs, the wrinkle in the tablecloths, the absence of a raffle ticket stub from beneath the sponge cake tray, all registered with a kind of quiet curiosity. "Sir," Love said, returning from a brief and fruitless interview with a lemon-curd stall volunteer. "No sign of anything. But someone did mention that Mrs. Penrose removed her coat earlier. Apparently she was hot after the Victoria sponge results." "Ah," said Purbright. And where was the coat placed? Over the back of a pew near the main entrance. And has anyone checked under the pew? I did, sir. Only found a glove, 3 mint wrappers, and a church newsletter from 2017. No brooch, then. Not unless it's disguised as sermon notes. As the evening darkened outside and the lights within the church hall grew fuzzier through the lingering fumes of elderflower, cordial and hot onion pasties, the crowd grew restless. A second scream did not come, but something almost better did. "Well, I never!" cried a voice near the cake display. "This isn't my handbag." Indeed, the object in question, a tasteful navy leather thing with gold clasps, contained not only a small tin of mints and a rather pointed editorial clipping about rhubarb blight, but also a delicate velvet pouch, the kind used to store jewelry. All eyes turned to the pouch, which a trembling hand opened. Inside, a tiny plastic trophy reading "Second place, pickled beetroot, 1992. No brooch. But it was unmistakably Mrs. Penrose's handbag. She turned a ghastly shade of pink. Then, "Where's mine?" she whispered. Purbright said nothing, but his glance flicked once more to the hymn board, then to the misplaced napkin no one had claimed. He smiled faintly. "It would appear," he said, "that someone in Flaxborough may soon be reunited with something they didn't know they'd lost." The handbags were now arrayed like suspects on a trestle table, lined up with accusatory, buckles and stiff straps as if awaiting a police line-up. Mrs. Penrose stood grimly beside her own, the plastic trophy still clutched in her gloved hand like a disappointing consolation prize. Around her, the women of the Flaxborough Women's Institute murmured like hens uneasy in their roost. "I know what my bag feels like," Mrs. Penrose said for the 3rd time. "The clasp has a certain click to it." "She says that every time she misplaces her shopping list," muttered Mrs. Carruthers, who had not forgotten being passed over for W.R. chair in 2011. Sergeant Love was dutifully making notes in his pocket-book, though the effort was akin to sketching smoke. Every statement contradicted the last, and the only certainty was that handbags had been moved, though by whom and for what purpose, no one could quite say. "Could have been a mix-up during the raffle," ventured Miss Gladys Wintle, whose voice trembled as if even her own suggestions might offend. All the bags were piled together while we drew the tickets. "Someone may have picked up the wrong one." Or, snapped Mrs. Penrose's niece, "someone deliberately switched them." Purbright, meanwhile, had wandered quietly to the back of the hall. He stood before the hymn board, the odd napkin now unobtrusively pinched between thumb and forefinger. He examined the stitching, pale blue thread forming a delicate floral pattern. A corner bore the faint imprint of lipstick, and beneath it an embroidered initial. P. He folded it neatly and placed it in his pocket. "Would you say," he asked gently, turning back toward the group, "that all the handbags were left unattended at some point?" There was a chorus of reluctant nods. "Tea break," said one. "Toilet," admitted another. "Prize announcement," muttered a third pointedly. "And during that time," Purbright continued, "someone might reasonably have moved a bag, either accidentally or deliberately." "Could have," said Mrs. Carruthers. "But what kind of person goes rifling through handbags during a community raffle?" "It's practically sacrilegious, unless," Love added, attempting insight, "they weren't after the brooch at all." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Mrs. Penrose sniffed. "It's always the same. Something goes missing, and people start pointing fingers. Like this is the Cheltenham races." "No one's pointing fingers," Purbright said mildly. "Merely trying to untangle threads." He turned toward the refreshment table. There, wedged between the lemon drizzle and a disturbingly glossy trifle, sat a folded council newsletter. It was last month's, May, and had a faint ring of elderflower squash on the cover. Purbright flipped it open. Inside was a list of names. The Flaxborough Civic Honours Committee. 3 of them were in the room. The incident with the handbags had stirred more than confusion. It had stirred a memory. Purbright could see it in the way some townsfolk had begun avoiding eye contact, not with him, but with one another. Rivalries buried beneath years of sponge cakes and raffle prizes now shifted like molehills in the lawn of civility. Miss Edith Plumstead, doyenne of the Horticultural Society, stood near the radiator with her arms folded. She was watching Mrs. Penrose with something that might have passed for sympathy had it not been sharpened with old resentment. Love caught Purbright's eye and ambled over. "Something odd about Edith," he said sotto voce, kept clutching her handbag like it was the Ark of the Covenant. "Understandable," said Purbright. "Most of these women carry the equivalent of National Archives in there. But you're right. She's shielding, not holding." Love brightened. "You think she took the brooch?" "I think," Purbright said, "we should ask what she's afraid we'll find." They approached her together. "Miss Plumstead," Purbright said gently, "might we borrow a moment of your time? We're trying to establish the sequence of events between the tea break and the raffle." She sniffed. "If this is an accusation—" "Merely a clarification," Purbright said smoothly. "You were seated, I believe, near the front row." "Yes, between Mrs. Penrose and the mayor's wife. And during the break, I remained seated." "My feet swell, Inspector." "Understandable. And did anyone approach you?" She hesitated. "No one directly." "Indirectly, then." "I noticed Mrs. Carruthers bend over the coat rack behind us. Said she'd dropped a pen." Purbright smiled. "And did she find it?" Miss Plumstead opened her mouth. "Closed it?" "I don't know. But I recall she left with 2 handbags. Said she was delivering one to the cloakroom." Purbright's smile tightened. "That's very helpful, thank you." As they walked back toward the table of handbags, Love whistled. "Do you think Mrs. Carruthers was trying to steal the brooch?" "I think," Purbright said, "that she may have intended something else entirely, and that the brooch was a complication." He paused. "Note how Mrs. Penrose's handbag ended up containing that plastic trophy. It wasn't there by accident." "You're saying a message?" "Perhaps. Or a reminder they reached the handbags." Purbright lifted the navy one again and opened the pouch containing the trophy. Beneath the velvet lining was a slip of paper, folded 3 times. He read it once, then again. Love leaned over. "What is it?" Purbright didn't answer at first. Then he refolded the note, slipped it back inside, and placed the pouch gently in the handbag. "Tell no one." "Not yet," he said. "But I believe we've just encountered our first motive." Love blinked. "For what?" Purbright glanced once more at the hymnboard. "For a theft that was never intended to look like one." By mid-morning the next day, the bunting had been packed away, the trestle tables returned to the vestry cupboard, and the scent of onion pasties replaced by the church hall's usual bouquet of polish and old sermons. But the mystery of the missing brooch had not, as some hoped, dissipated with the festive bunting. If anything, it had fermented, like an overkept chutney, into something stronger. Inspector Purbright sat in his office at the police station, sunlight glinting off the brass paperweight shaped like a trout. Before him lay the hymnboard napkin, the council newsletter, and a fresh note from Sergeant Love, who had just returned from a cautious visit to Mrs. Carruthers's house. According to Love, the lady in question had been in combative spirits, and while not outright refusing questions, had met each one with a raised eyebrow and a suspiciously detailed alibi that included references to her cat's digestive habits and a missing jar of hair-setting lotion. "She's hiding something," Love insisted, setting down his notebook with a thud. "Wouldn't let me near her spare bedroom, said the cleaner had upset her sideboard and the whole thing was booby-trapped with teacups." Purbright tapped the edge of the napkin thoughtfully. You didn't happen to notice if she had a fondness for embroidery? She's more the crocheted doily type, sir. Everything in her sitting room looked like it had been wrapped in lace and regret. Purbright smiled faintly. And the handbags? Still couldn't say how the switch happened. Everyone's sure theirs is theirs, but no one's sure when they last looked inside. Half of them don't even remember putting them down. Purbright murmured. An odd phenomenon. People remember locking their front doors, but not where they placed the thing holding the key. Love looked puzzled. You think the brooch wasn't stolen, then? Oh, I'm quite certain it was. But not for profit. At that moment, the station door clicked open, and in shuffled Councillor Gordon Birtwistle, a man who perpetually looked like he'd just swallowed a teaspoon of vinegar. He wore a brown suit of such earnest drabness it seemed to apologize for its own existence. "Inspector," he began, removing his hat with reverence, "I've just come from the mayor's office." There's concern. Mild, mind you. That the incident at the fete may be gaining unwanted attention. Unwanted by whom? Purbright asked mildly. Well, there's talk, Birtwistle said, smoothing his tie. Local gossip is one thing, but I'm told someone from the Flaxborough Mercury has begun asking questions. You know how they like a scandal. They'll be talking of theft rings next, or jewel smugglers disguised as choir members. I should think, said Purbright, they'd find the truth rather more curious than fiction. Birtwistle cleared his throat. You're not pursuing this too publicly, I hope? On the contrary, Purbright said, I've no intention of causing a stir. Just a few conversations. Quiet ones. Good, said Birtwistle, visibly relieved. We wouldn't want this to overshadow the civic honours nominations. Purbright raised an eyebrow. The what? Oh, Birtwistle blinked. No, nothing. Just the usual committee thing. Recognition for long service to the town. Entirely routine. He adjusted his lapels and turned to leave. Well, if you'll excuse me. As the door shut behind him, Love let out a low whistle. He looked jumpier than a weasel in a ferret show. Indeed, said Purbright, which is curious, given the only thing missing is a brooch. Love stared. You think it's connected to the civic honours? I think, said Purbright, it's time we paid another visit. But not to the Carruthers household. To Miss Plumstead, Love's face fell slightly. She'll make us sit on those itchy chairs again. Probably. But she has information, and I'd like to see what she's done with her handbag in the privacy of her home. It was nearly noon by the time they arrived at Miss Plumstead's modest bungalow, tucked neatly behind a hedge, trimmed into a shape that vaguely resembled the Queen. She answered the door with a tight smile and a frown of expectancy. I suppose you'll want tea, she said. Only if it's no trouble, Purbright replied. It always is, she muttered, disappearing into the kitchen. The living room was just as Love remembered, dense with furniture and bristling with floral cushions. The room's sole concession to modernity was a color television set draped in a lace cover. Your visit the other day, Purbright began when the tea arrived, helped us rule out several possibilities. But I wonder, would you mind showing us your handbag again? Her eyes narrowed. I told you, I had no part in any theft. I'm not accusing you, Miss Plumstead, but I suspect the brooch passed near you, possibly even into your possession. Briefly, she hesitated, then stood and crossed to a corner dresser. From beneath a pile of hymnals and seed catalogues, she produced her handbag, an ancient brown leather affair with a clasp that clicked open with a sound like an old trap being sprung. Here, she said, handing it to him. Purbright examined it with care. The lining was slightly frayed. Inside, he found a small handkerchief, a crumpled receipt for beetroot relish, and, tucked into a side pocket, a packet of barley sugars wrapped in a church newsletter. He unfolded the paper. It was the civic honours draft. Names typed neatly. One had been circled. Mrs. Alma Penrose Purbright held it up. This wouldn't have anything to do with the brooch, would it? Miss Plumstead's face tightened. She doesn't deserve it, she said, low and bitter. That award, she only got it because she organizes everything and simpers at the mayor. So, said Purbright gently, you tried to embarrass her. I only meant to make her look careless, she admitted, to show she's not the pillar everyone thinks. And the brooch? I never touched it, she said quickly, but someone else did. I saw Mrs. Carruthers take her bag. She looked straight at me and smiled. Purbright leaned back. So it seems, he said, we've now two people trying to make Mrs. Penrose look bad, and one brooch still missing. They walked back from Miss Plumstead's in the soft hush of early afternoon, the kind of hour in Flaxborough when lawn mowers ceased, curtains twitched, and the postman became the most powerful man alive. Purbright walked steadily, hands behind his back, while Sergeant Love trotted alongside, his notebook clutched tightly but still unopened. She admitted to planting the civic honors sheet, Love said, half triumphant, half bewildered. But why bother with a handbag switch at all if she didn't take the brooch? To stir the pot, Purbright said. A small scandal is more believable when it accompanies a larger one. Miss Plumstead wanted Mrs. Penrose to be embarrassed, not devastated. That came courtesy of someone else. They crossed the square, where a newly erected notice board announced next week's Parish Bake and Beetle Drive. A group of elderly gentlemen sat beneath it on a bench, discussing who might take over choir duties now that Mr. Ellis's lumbago had finally won. At the station, Constable Peach was waiting with a paper bag and the air of someone guarding a national treasure. It was handed in at the library, he said, by a Mrs. Tallis. She found it in a returned copy of the bell jar. Purbright opened the bag. Inside lay a tissue-wrapped object. The green stone winked up at him like a cat in half-light. Well, he said, the brooch returns. Love whistled. In a library book. The poetry section, no less, Peach added. Mrs. Tallis said it fell out when she turned the page. Page 74. Purbright lifted the tissue and examined the brooch. No sign of damage, he murmured. Fastening still intact. Love leaned in. So someone pinched it, then decided to hide it in a book. Not hide, Sergeant, said Purbright. Deposit, there's a difference. But who would do that? That, said Purbright, slipping the brooch back into the tissue, is precisely what I intend to find out. By late afternoon, word of the brooch's reappearance had reached the necessary ears. Mrs. Penrose came to collect it personally, flanked by her niece and trailing a smell of Parma violets and righteous vindication. She held the tissue in trembling fingers. This proves it, doesn't it? She said. It was taken. Intentionally, possibly, Purbright said, though we must still establish by whom and why. Her niece sniffed. That Carruthers woman is involved. I'll bet she reads books like that. The bell jar, for its part, remained silent on the matter. Once they'd left, Love settled in with a sigh. So where does that leave us, sir? The brooch vanished, then popped up in a library. Plumstead admits to trying to undermine Penrose, but didn't touch the thing. And Carruthers, well, she's got the attitude, but nothing solid. Purbright looked out the window. The sun was low now, turning the town golden and forgiving. Time for a community event, he said. Love blinked. Another fete? Something simpler. Visible. Contained. He paused. The Flaxborough players are holding their rehearsal tonight at the town hall. A period drama, I believe. Large cast, old costumes, plenty of handbags backstage. Love brightened. You think our culprit might be among the cast? I think, Purbright said. "Our brooch took a brief detour through fiction. It's only fitting we return to the theatre to retrieve the truth." They arrived at the town hall as the sun dipped behind the municipal car park. A banner outside read, "The Empress of Netherwick, a Flaxborough Players Production." Inside, the stage was a flurry of petticoats and powdered wigs. The director, a man named Fenwick with a monocle that had long ago surrendered all optical purpose, greeted them with dramatic despair. "We're in chaos, Inspector. Myrtle's wig is infested, Lionel's forgotten Act 3 entirely, and someone's painted the chaise longue with shoe polish. I assume you've come for comic relief?" "Merely observation," Purbright said, smiling. "May we sit at the back? If you can find 2 chairs not propping up the set, be my guest." They did, and for the next 20 minutes observed the sort of theatrical production only a rural society could produce with such earnest intensity. Amidst the lurching lines and misplaced props, Purbright watched the actors. Not their performance, but their habits. The way they handled their costumes, their handbags, how they waited off stage. It was during a clumsy scene change, involving a decapitated mannequin and a squeaky backdrop, that Purbright leaned over to Love. "Did you see that? The bit where the Viscount stabbed the fireplace?" "No," Purbright said. "Miss Maplecroft. She just placed a handbag behind the curtains, but she wasn't carrying one when she arrived." Love squinted. "You think she's the one?" "Not sure yet. But if she's hiding a prop that doesn't belong to the play..." They waited until the final scene limped to its conclusion. Then, as the cast broke for tea and complaints, Purbright quietly stepped behind the curtains. There it was. A simple brown handbag, faintly dusted with glitter. Inside, a folded program, a tube of lipstick, a pair of reading glasses, and a note. Tucked between the pages. He unfolded it. Typed. Clean. Margins. "If you're reading this, you know already. She doesn't deserve to win. It was always mine before she took him and made the committee hers." Purbright read it twice, then passed it to Love. Love swallowed. "This isn't just about the brooch, is it?" "No," said Purbright softly. "It's about a grievance long forgotten by everyone but the one still nursing it." He looked out at the stage, where Miss Maplecroft was laughing with another actor, her hand never far from her handbag. "Now," he said, "we only need to discover who the note was meant for." The next morning brought a soft, persistent drizzle that clung to the windows of the Flaxborough police station like gossip on a Monday. Inside, Inspector Purbright sat with the note spread neatly before him, while Sergeant Love paced beside the filing cabinet with the air of a man determined to accelerate thought through movement. "So, whoever planted the brooch in the library book," Love began, "also planted that letter in Maplecroft's handbag." "Possibly," Purbright said, "or she placed it there herself. Either way, it wasn't meant to be read by the police. It was meant to be found. Discovered in a moment of theatrical convenience, like during the play? Exactly. An emotional outburst, a handbag was knocked over, a note fluttering to the ground. The perfect touch of melodrama for someone who prefers their vengeance with a spotlight. Love rubbed the back of his neck. And the line, "She took him," that narrows things, doesn't it? Romantic jealousy, perhaps. Or committee politics dressed in romantic overtones. In Flaxborough, the two are often indistinguishable. There came a knock at the door. Constable Peach stepped in, holding a small parcel. "From the town hall prop box," he said. "Cleaning lady found it stuffed inside the upholstery of the chaise longue." Purbright opened the package carefully. Inside was a scrap of a theatre program, torn down the middle, with a single line underlined in blue pencil. Starring Myrtle Blenkinsop as the Empress of Netherwick. Beneath it, in faint biro, again, "Must she have everything?" Love whistled. "There's that tone again." Purbright smiled faintly. Myrtle has played the lead in 5 of the last 6 productions, and coincidentally sits on both the Players' Selection Committee and the Civic Honors Board. You think someone's getting tired of her starring in life as well as fiction? Purbright folded the program. Someone is certainly writing an unsent letter of protest in props and clues. Later that morning, they paid Myrtle Blenkinsop a polite visit at her semi-detached house on Grasmere Avenue. The front garden was aggressive in its symmetry, with rose bushes clipped into near-identical spheres and a bird bath that appeared to have been polished. Myrtle greeted them in a turquoise housecoat and lipstick the color of defiance. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "if this is about the missing brooch, I must tell you, I never had it." "We're not accusing you," Purbright said smoothly, "only trying to establish the pattern of recent misplacements." "I told the paper it was all theater nonsense," she continued, gesturing them into a sitting room that smelled of furniture polish and interrupted conversations. "Someone trying to make trouble for Alma, probably." "Oh?" Purbright settled into an armchair that attempted to sit back. "You think Mrs. Penrose was the target?" "Absolutely. She's rubbed plenty the wrong way. That whole award business, no one likes a shoe-in, but you support her nomination?" Myrtle hesitated, then gave a tight smile. "Of course. She's tireless. Relentless, really. Never forgets a birthday or a budget. But let's not pretend she doesn't ruffle feathers." Love, flipping idly through a framed photo on the mantelpiece, asked, "And what about Miss Maplecroft?" She seemed nervous at rehearsal. "Marjorie? Oh, she's harmless. A bit theatrical off stage, too. Can't go 5 minutes without quoting Oscar Wilde. I doubt she's behind this, but she handled that handbag backstage," Purbright said. "The one containing the note." Myrtle blinked. "I didn't see any note." "Interesting," Purbright murmured. "Then perhaps someone intended for you two." The silence that followed was tight enough to snap. "I don't appreciate the implication," Myrtle said, standing. "If you think I'm involved in whatever petty drama this is, I think someone is staging scenes," Purbright said gently. "And they've written a script where everyone plays a part." They left Myrtle's house to find the drizzle had turned to a committed rain, soaking the gutters and darkening the cobblestones. Love opened his umbrella with a resigned sigh. "She's hiding something," he muttered. "Did you see how she bristled when you mentioned the civic honors?" "She's used to playing the center of attention," Purbright said. "And now someone's pricking her confidence with a brooch and a note." Back at the station, a call was waiting. "Inspector," said Mrs. Flood, the librarian, with breathless urgency. "We've had another item returned." Anonymously, in the night drop box. "It's a theater ticket. For the opening night." Torn, but with writing on the back. Purbright thanked her and hung up. "Another clue?" Love asked. "Another scene," Purbright replied. They reached the library just before noon. Mrs. Flood handed over the envelope like it might bite. Inside, a ticket stub for the Empress of Netherwick, opening night, seat D12. On the back, scrawled in green ink, "Watch her when she takes her beau. Everything she has, she stole." Love blinked. "Who's she?" Purbright looked down at the stub, then back at the handwritten message. Whichever leading lady the writer envied most. They both knew which one that was. Purbright slipped the stub into an evidence sleeve. "Prepare the theater for another visit," he said. "Tonight we watch the performance. And the audience." The town hall stage lights flickered to life with all the conviction of a thunderstorm threatening to strike. A modest Thursday crowd had gathered for the opening night of the Empress of Netherwick, undeterred by drizzle or the undercurrent of scandal that had rippled through Flaxborough since the incident with the brooch. In fact, if the subdued rustling and sharp glances across the aisles were any indication, many had come not for the play, but for the possibility of a dramatic slip, off script or otherwise. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love sat near the back, ostensibly as community supporters, but in truth as quiet auditors of behavior. Both had their coats folded neatly in their laps, and their expressions arranged to appear neither too interested nor too detached. The curtains parted on Myrtle Blenkinsop's Empress with regal authority. Her entrance was met with polite applause, though Purbright noted a distinct lack of enthusiasm from the third row, where Miss Maplecroft sat with lips pursed and fingers wrapped tightly around a damp program. As the play unfolded with the usual mix of high diction and mild forgetfulness, Purbright's attention wandered not to the lines, but to the shifting in the crowd. Mrs. Carruthers leaned in to whisper to Mrs. Penrose's niece twice. The second time, the niece recoiled slightly. In the opposite corner, Councillor Bert Whistle stared stiffly ahead, knuckles white on the armrests, while Alma Penrose herself sat with the composure of a queen observing a rival's coronation. It was at the end of Act 2 that the moment arrived. Myrtle, having dispatched a treacherous courtier with a particularly dramatic slap, turned to deliver her exit line. As she bowed, a broad, graceful affair designed for maximum spotlight, something fell from the bodice of her gown. A glint, a soft clink, a brooch. Not the green-stoned heirloom, but another, a twin. The audience murmured. Myrtle froze for a heartbeat too long. Then, with exaggerated poise, she bent and retrieved the fallen item, smiling as though nothing had happened. The scene ended on a slightly ragged note, the curtain falling with a thump that might have been intentional. Backstage, the mood was edgier than the wigs. Purbright and Love made their way past cast members, peeling off costumes and seeking sherry. Curious, Purbright murmured. What sort of empress forgets she's wearing a brooch until it betrays her? You think she did it on purpose? Love asked. I think Myrtle Blenkinsop never does anything by accident. They found her in the dressing room, dabbing her temples with cologne. Inspector, she said, without looking up. Did you enjoy the show? Greatly, Purbright replied, though I confess I was surprised by the addition of new jewelry in the second act. She met his gaze in the mirror. A stage prop. Part of the revised costume. We thought it added imperial flair. Then it was unfortunate timing, its fall. Or fortunate, she said with a tight smile. Perhaps it drew attention where it belonged. You mean back to you? Her hand paused mid-dab. It was never truly away, was it? Purbright glanced at the cluttered dressing table. Among the powder tins and lace gloves was a slip of paper, handwritten in the same green ink as the message on the theatre ticket. He leaned closer. You've had more than one anonymous note, then? She folded the paper over without hesitation. You've seen it. Someone thinks I'm undeserving of my position. Of the role, of the award, perhaps. And are you? Myrtle laughed, low and dry. Is anyone in Flaxborough truly deserving of admiration? We all borrow it, wear it, then hand it on like a borrowed shawl. Back in the hallway, Love gave a low whistle. She's hiding something. Or inviting it. Both, Purbright said, but the performance wasn't for the audience. It was for the person behind the notes. They waited by the rear exit. When the final bows had been taken and the audience thinned into drizzle and damp applause, a figure emerged, Marjorie Maplecroft, alone, clutching her handbag tightly, her face pale beneath her rouge. Purbright stepped into her path. Miss Maplecroft, he said gently. It's been quite a show. She blinked. I thought you might come. Then you'll know why we're here. The note in your handbag, the message on the program, the ticket. And now, the brooch. I didn't take it, she said quickly. I swear. But you knew it would reappear. Her breath caught. I thought it might, she whispered. She wanted it that way. She? Love asked. You mean Myrtle? Marjorie hesitated, then nodded. It was all staged, but not for the audience. For her. She wanted Penrose to feel it, to know she wasn't untouchable. "Did you help her?" No, not really. Just passed along a few things. Suggestions. Typed a note. I didn't know she'd actually plant the brooch." Purbright studied her face. "You were once up for an honor, weren't you?" Her voice turned bitter. 3 years ago, I'd done the town history project, raised funds for the library restoration, and organized the winter concert. Then Myrtle nominated Alma instead, for her years of unseen contributions. And you held on to that? We all do, Inspector. Flaxborough never forgets. It just files things under pending revenge." Purbright exhaled slowly. "One final question, Miss Maplecroft. Did you write the first note? The one in the handbag?" She hesitated, then quietly, "No." They watched her go, her umbrella bouncing along the pavement like a slow metronome. Love turned. "So there's a third player?" "Yes," said Purbright, eyes narrowing, "and they've yet to take their bow." The following morning dawned cold and sullen, with the sort of grey skies that made even pigeons look indecisive. In the quiet hush of the Flaxborough police station, Inspector Purbright leaned once again over the growing stack of notes, clues, and contradictory testimonies. The brooch had come back, but like an actor who returned for an encore uninvited, it had brought more drama than closure. The green stone glittered from within its evidence envelope, the only constant in a plot increasingly shaped by old grievances and selective truths. Sergeant Love entered holding a steaming mug and a face that said he'd had to deal with at least 2 gossipy shopkeepers before 9. "They're all talking about it," he said, setting the mug down. Apparently, Myrtle's brooch tumble was the most thrilling moment since the co-op caught fire in '98. "Remarkable," Purbright murmured, "given that one involved actual flames." Love sat down. "We've ruled out Maplecroft as the original thief, but she typed at least one of the notes. Myrtle staged the second brooch incident to needle Alma publicly, and yet none of them actually took the brooch from Mrs. Penrose's coat that day." "No," Purbright said quietly, "which means we've been watching the performance while someone worked the wings." He reached for the police station telephone and dialed slowly. After a moment, he spoke into the receiver. "Mrs. Flood, could I trouble you for the borrowing records from last week?" "Yes, particularly for any checkouts of the bell jar." "Thank you." Love raised an eyebrow. "Back to the library?" "The brooch was found there," Purbright said, "but more importantly, someone expected it to be found. Books are returned by habit. Whoever left it knew it would be discovered, and that it would look accidental." 15 minutes later, Mrs. Flood handed them a pale blue ledger with edges softened by years of overdue apologies. She tapped a column with a precise fingernail. "The bell jar was borrowed last Monday," she said, "by Miss Ivy Langton." "Langton," Love frowned. "She's the new assistant at the vicarage, isn't she?" "Joined a few months ago," Mrs. Flood confirmed. "Very helpful. Quiet, always volunteering. Keeps to herself," Purbright nodded. "A newcomer with access to church spaces and coat racks." Mrs. Flood's brow furrowed. "She returned the book on Wednesday morning, dropped it in the night box. Didn't even come inside, and before she worked at the vicarage. Came from Dorking, I believe," she said. "Joined the Historical Society her first week." That earned a glance between Purbright and Love. Love leaned closer. "Did she ever mention being in the theatre?" Mrs. Flood tilted her head. "Yes. Said she used to do amateur dramatics. Played Ophelia once. Thought she looked better dead than dramatic, apparently." Back outside, Purbright's gaze drifted to the drizzle-beaded gravestones behind the churchyard. "If you were new to Flaxborough," he said slowly, "you'd observe everything but remain invisible. You'd hear old grudges without being part of them. You'd learn the rhythms. And if you had a mind for drama, you'd write the perfect scene," Love finished. They crossed the square and knocked on the side door of the vicarage. Ivy Langton opened it after a pause, her expression calm and her apron lightly dusted with flour. "Inspector?" she said, with the air of someone perpetually expecting a casserole or an interrogation. "This is unexpected." Purbright offered a mild smile. "May we come in?" "It's a matter regarding the brooch." She hesitated, then stepped aside. The hallway smelled of baking and old hymnals. "I understand you were the last to borrow the bell jar," Purbright said as they entered the modest sitting room. "I was," Ivy said. "Is that relevant?" "It's where the brooch was found." Her hands folded neatly. "That's awful. But I didn't notice anything unusual. I only read the first few chapters. May I ask where you had the book between borrowing it and returning it?" She blinked. "It was on the windowsill in the vicar's study." "Was it left open?" "I think so. I marked a page, but it might have been knocked over. We had a bit of wind that Tuesday." "And did anyone visit the vicarage that day?" She hesitated. Mrs. Penrose stopped by. She was arranging something with Reverend Bartle for the upcoming concert. Purbright nodded slowly. "Would she have had access to the study?" "I suppose so. I wasn't watching her the entire time." Love shifted. "Did you notice anything strange after she left?" "She seemed a little flustered. Said she'd lost her pen. Did she find it?" "I don't know," Ivy said. "She went back to check, then left rather quickly." Purbright's eyes narrowed just slightly. "And when did you last see the brooch?" She blinked again. "I've never seen it in person." He offered a gentle smile. "That's not entirely true, is it?" Her breath caught. "It wasn't yours to take," Purbright said softly. "But it was yours to place." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she sat down slowly, hands trembling in her lap. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "It was supposed to be a commentary, a gesture. Flaxborough lives on its rituals and false idols. Alma Penrose is one of them. You planted the brooch," Purbright said, "but not out of malice." "No," she said, "out of irritation, out of the theater. I just wanted her to stumble, just once, so others could see the cracks. And the notes? Only one of them, the one in the book. I never meant for Myrtle or Maplecroft to take it further." Purbright rose, his voice soft. "You gave them a script, Miss Langton, and they wrote their own lines." She looked down. "Will I be charged?" "That depends," Purbright said, "on whether Mrs. Penrose wishes to press matters, and whether Flaxborough finds forgiveness before it finds another scandal." As they stepped back into the cold drizzle, Love exhaled. "So that's it then?" Purbright shook his head. "Not quite. Ivy was the playwright, Myrtle the actress, Maplecroft the chorus. But someone still played the role of stagehand." Love frowned. "There's still more?" Purbright smiled faintly. "There's always an understudy waiting in the wings." The evening brought with it a bitter wind and a peculiar hush that seemed to hang over Flaxborough like the closing curtain on a comedy that had gone on too long. The matter of the brooch had been, outwardly at least, resolved, with Ivy Langton's confession filling in much of the timeline and motive. Yet for Inspector Purbright, there remained a note of discord, faint but persistent, like an instrument slightly out of tune in an otherwise harmonious quartet. Sergeant Love, content with the apparent resolution, had already begun to draft the official report. "Miss Langton's admitted to planting the brooch, the first note, and even the choice of book," he said, tapping his pencil against the desk. "Seems tidy enough, sir." Purbright stood by the window, looking out at the silent square beyond, where the golden street lamps lit puddles like discarded coins. "Too tidy," he murmured. She confessed too readily. Love looked up. "You don't believe her?" "Oh, I believe she planted the brooch. But not the idea." There was a pause as Love frowned, trying to track the inspector's meaning. Someone suggested it to her? He asked. Worse, Purbright said. Someone made her believe it was her own. He turned back to the desk and picked up the envelope containing the first anonymous note, the one found in the handbag that started it all. He had read it several times over, but now he focused not on the words but the folds, the creases, the slightly off-center typing. It wasn't just a message. It was a theater. And who, he murmured, has the talent to write drama in real time through other people's hands? Love blinked. You think it's one of the players? I think it's someone who knew everyone's role before the curtain even rose. He reached for the Civic Honors nomination sheet and laid it out once again. Alma Penrose, Myrtle Blenkinsop, Councillor Bert Whistle, Miss Maplecroft, Miss Plumstead, all involved. All are either suspects, instigators, or pawns. Except one name. Mildred Carruthers. Love squinted. But she was never in the thick of it, just hissing from the sidelines. Exactly, said Purbright. The sidelines offer the best view. He asked Constable Peach to summon Mrs. Carruthers for a brief clarification interview. She arrived within the hour, her raincoat buttoned to the chin, and a handbag that looked like it could swallow small pets. She removed her gloves, finger by finger, each movement deliberate. I must say, Inspector, she began, this has been quite the palaver over a brooch. Quite, Purbright agreed, and yet something about it never quite fit. Which part? Your part, Mrs. Carruthers. She gave a half-smile as if indulging a child. I was at the fete, she said, as you know. I helped with the scones. I commented, perhaps a touch too loudly, when Mrs. Penrose arrived wearing the brooch. I made no secret of my feelings, but I never laid a finger on the thing. Did you write the note placed in Miss Penrose's handbag? I did not. Purbright raised an eyebrow. You've used a typewriter recently, haven't you? Of course. I run the WI minutes on an old Remington. No secret there. And have you ever lent your typewriter to Miss Langton? Mrs. Carruthers tilted her head. She borrowed it once. Needed to type a reference letter when? About a week before the fete. Purbright nodded slowly. You see, Ivy's typed note, the one found in the book, was on that machine, but the first note, the one in the handbag, was typed slightly differently. Same ribbon, different hand. There was a flicker in her expression. Not quite an alarm, more like a dropped stitch. You orchestrated it, he said softly. You let Ivy believe she was clever. You whispered things, planted a little doubt, watched as she played her part. And when the brooch disappeared, when she acted, you watched everyone else follow her lead. Mrs. Carruthers stood stiffly. That is a very elaborate accusation. It is, Purbright agreed. Elaborate enough that only someone like you, someone never in the spotlight, always next to it, could have built it. Love, who had been silent, now leaned forward. You hated that Penrose got nominated again, didn't you? She always wins, Carruthers snapped before catching herself. It's not about jealousy. It's about fairness. I've chaired 3 subcommittees. I've never missed a harvest meeting. I've mended the bell ropes and kept the vicar's wife out of scandal more than once. But does anyone think of me when it's time to hand out ribbons and plaques? Number. They think of Alma and her bloody sponge cake. Her voice wavered at the end, not with sadness, but weariness. I just wanted her to feel uncertain, she said. Just once. Not to suffer, just to stumble. You involved half the town, Purbright said. I merely nudged what was already there. Ivy's need to belong, Myrtle's vanity, Maplecroft's bitterness. All I had to do was give them a stage. There was a pause. Purbright folded the note and placed it back in its envelope. You understand there'll be consequences, he said gently. She nodded. Make them official. Then perhaps the town will finally notice me. She rose, smoothed her skirt, and left with the calm of someone who had orchestrated a symphony, and was now prepared for the silence that followed. Love exhaled slowly. Well, that's the quietest confession I've ever heard. It wasn't a confession, Purbright said, watching the door close behind her. It was the final act. News of Mrs. Carruthers' quiet admission spread through Flaxborough, not as a scandal, but as a sort of collective sigh, as though the entire town had suspected it all along, but lacked the decorum to say it aloud. She returned to her usual routine without fanfare, declining only to attend the weekly Women's Institute gathering, where her absence was noted, dissected, and, inevitably, mythologized. Poor woman, someone murmured over sponge fingers and weak tea. Always did have a talent for invisible mischief. Inspector Purbright, meanwhile, remained unconvinced that all threads had been tied. There were no more notes, no fresh accusations. Yet the case, for all its confessions, still felt unbalanced, like a play where the leading actor had left the stage too early. He sat that afternoon in his office, the brooch in its envelope placed squarely before him. It was now evidence without a crime, a glittering relic of mischief and misdirection, but still, in its way, a prop from a drama yet to finish its run. Sergeant Love entered with the hesitant look of a man who was about to report on something both trivial and potentially devastating. "I just came from the Civic Committee notice board, sir," he said, removing his cap. "They've posted the honours shortlist." Purbright glanced up. "And?" "Alma Penrose is off it." That gave him pause. "Withdrawn?" According to Councillor Burt Whistle, she sent a letter declining her nomination. Said she wished to avoid further distraction and preferred to let others be recognized. Purbright stood slowly and crossed to the window. Outside, the sky had turned an uneasy shade of silver. Did she offer a reason? None she wanted made public. Just that she was tired of being the face of everything. Purbright tapped a finger gently against the glass. "No mention of Carruthers?" "Not directly." "She's still playing," Purbright murmured. "But now she's rewriting the ending." Love blinked. "Penrose?" "Yes. She's not stepping aside to restore peace. She's doing it because someone made her believe her position wasn't earned." Love frowned. "But the scheme's already unraveled." "Unraveled publicly, yes. But words linger longer than evidence. Especially here." There was a brief knock on the door and Constable Peach peered in. "Sorry, sir, but there's someone asking for you." "At the station counter." Ivy Langton. A short while later, Miss Langton sat across from them, her hands folded tightly around a small box wrapped in a silk scarf. "I know I've already said everything I can," she began, "but I found something this morning while clearing the vicarage attic. It's peculiar." Purbright unwrapped the scarf slowly. Inside was an old diary, faded green leather, the name Vera C. embossed on the cover. He flipped through the pages. Most entries detailing garden arrangements, church committees, hymn selections. But tucked between 2 pages from 1979 was a photograph. Black and white, taken in a garden. 2 women, laughing, one unmistakably a younger Alma Penrose. The other, Purbright tilted it toward Ivy. "Do you recognize her?" She nodded. "That's Vera Cartwright. She was the vicar's wife at the time. Died years ago, and the woman with her, Alma. I found more of these upstairs in an envelope marked Summer Fete 1978. Purbright returned to the diary, flipping to the corresponding entry. Alma did it again, smoothed everything, saved the entire event after Elsie dropped the cake. Always so composed, everyone sees her as serene, but I saw her flinch when they mentioned Carruthers for chair. That smile of hers is not just grace, it's armor." Love let out a low breath. "So even back then, she was absorbing things," Purbright finished, "taking blows for others." Ivy leaned forward. "I brought it because I thought Maybe Alma needs to see it, to remember how long she's mattered, even when it didn't feel like it. Purbright studied her for a moment. Miss Langton, were you fond of her? I admired her, Ivy said, even while trying to unseat her. But it was easy to see only the surface. Everyone does. And some of us wanted to see it crack. Purbright wrapped the diary again. You did the right thing bringing this. Will you show it to her? Purbright didn't answer immediately. In time. Later that evening, he strolled alone past the square, where the windows of the town hall glowed faintly with the last of the week's rehearsals. He passed Myrtle Blenkinsop, who offered a gracious nod, and Miss Maplecroft, who did not meet his eyes. Everyone was quietly returning to their places. Even Mrs. Carruthers, glimpsed through a window arranging a vase of chrysanthemums, was easing herself back into domestic respectability. He reached the post box outside the co-op, paused, then withdrew a sealed envelope from his coat. It contained the diary, a copy of the photo, and no note. He slipped it in, addressed plainly to Mrs. Alma Penrose, Glenview Terrace, Flaxborough. Behind him, the town exhaled into the soft dark. Not quite at peace, but quieter now, like an audience waiting for the final bow. The following day opened with crisp sun and dry pavements, as if Flaxborough had finally shrugged off the lingering damp of the past week's revelations. In the square, shopkeepers lifted shutters with marginally less suspicion, and Mrs. Flood at the library permitted herself an optimistic blouse with daisies. Whatever current still stirred beneath the town's surface, above it there was the faint rustle of returning routine. At the police station, Inspector Purbright stood at the filing cabinet, sliding the folder marked "Penrose, Theft of Brooch, Recovered," into the drawer with a quiet finality. Sergeant Love, seated nearby, was puzzling through the weekly duty rota, scratching out names and frowning at half-committed volunteers. "Feels odd," Love said after a moment, "having nothing to investigate. No interviews, no lies to sniff through." Purbright closed the drawer with a gentle click. "Odd is Flaxborough's natural state, Sergeant." "Peace is the interruption." A knock sounded at the door, brisk but unhurried. Councillor Bert Whistle stepped in, looking thoroughly pressed, both in suit and in manner, and carrying a small cardboard box sealed with twine. "Inspector," he began, "I do hope I'm not disturbing anything." "Only serenity," Purbright said. "Come in." Bert Whistle sat, uninvited but purposeful. He rested the box on his knees and cleared his throat. "I come on behalf of the Civic Honours Committee. There's been a decision about Mrs. Penrose." "Yes." He loosened the twine. "Though she declined her nomination, the committee felt, unanimously I might add, that a gesture of appreciation was still due." He opened the box and removed a modest but elegant silver plaque. It bore the town crest and the words, "In grateful recognition of Alma Penrose for quiet grace and enduring service. To the people of Flaxborough." Purbright studied it, then looked up. "Unusual wording." "Yes," Bert Whistle said. "I insisted on the phrasing. No superlatives. Just what she's been." Love leaned forward, curiosity overriding protocol. "And she's agreed to accept it." "She doesn't know." Bert Whistle coughed. "It's to be presented tomorrow, quietly, after the Church Flower Committee meeting. No press, no fanfare. Just us." Purbright nodded. "That sounds more like Flaxborough." As the councillor departed, Love shook his head. "That's the closest thing we'll get to repentance, isn't it?" "Possibly," Purbright said. "Or at least recognition that not all good deeds need to be paraded." They returned to their duties, but by early afternoon, a handwritten note arrived, folded neatly and left at the front desk. It bore no name, just a simple request in precise penmanship. "Inspector, if you've time, I'd appreciate a moment. You'll find me by the Riverwalk, near the old footbridge. Yours, A pea. Purbright found her seated on a bench with a view of the water, her coat drawn, close, gloves folded neatly in her lap. She looked smaller than usual, not physically but in presence, as though some quiet shield had been lowered. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't far," Purbright replied, settling beside her. For a while, they sat in silence, watching the reeds shift with the breeze and a pair of moorhens bob upstream, arguing in gentle squeaks. "I received something yesterday," she said at last. "An envelope. No return address." Purbright nodded but said nothing. "It had a diary," she continued. "Vera's. And a photograph. I'd forgotten it existed." "You haven't been forgotten," he said gently. She smiled without looking at him. "You know, I wore that brooch because I thought it made me look composed. That silly green stone gave me courage. That's all it ever was. Costume jewelry for a role I didn't audition for." "Some roles," Purbright said, "find their actors." Alma turned her head, studied his face. "Was it Carruthers?" "She lit the match," he said, "but the fire spread because others were already dry kindling." "Ivy Langton apologized," Alma said. "She came to see me this morning. Told me about the book and the note. She looked more frightened of me than of prison. She respects you." "She resented me first," Alma replied, "but perhaps that's not such a terrible thing. It means I meant something to her." The breeze stirred again. Somewhere across the water, a church bell chimed once. "I declined the honor," Alma said after a moment. "You know that?" "I heard. It wasn't out of pride," she said. "It was fatigue." "You've given Flaxborough more than it ever knew it needed," Purbright said. "But sometimes it takes a crisis for towns to look beyond the sponge cakes and rosters." She smiled faintly. "I expect Myrtle will get it next year." "She'll campaign for it like the role of a lifetime," he said. Alma chuckled, a light, surprised sound that scattered into the wind. "I don't need a plaque," she said, "but I'll keep the photo." They sat a moment longer before she rose, gloves in hand. "Thank you, Inspector," she said, "for investigating more than just the missing item." "It was never about the brooch," he said, standing. "It was about the hand that pinned it on." As she walked away down the river path, straight-backed and quiet, Purbright watched her fade into the light mist that had begun to rise from the water. The town would go on, with its fetes and its whispers, its rivalry laced with jam and judgment. But for now, it had remembered itself, and that was enough. The next morning, just after the bell at St. Botolph's chimed 9, a modest gathering assembled in the rear room of the parish hall, where the flower committee typically bickered over gladioli arrangements and watered-down cordial. Today, however, the tablecloth had been ironed, the custard cream stacked in neat pyramids, and a faint air of expectancy hung in the fusty air like overused lavender spray. Mrs. Alma Penrose arrived punctually, her expression calm, though the glint in her eye suggested she was not entirely ignorant of the reason behind the summons. She wore no brooch. Her lapel was bare. Deliberately so, it seemed. Councillor Bert Whistle cleared his throat and rose, unfolding a sheet of paper with ceremony disproportionate to the room's size. "Mrs. Penrose," he began, "on behalf of the Civic Honors Committee and the community of Flaxborough, we wish to express our sincere gratitude for your enduring service, unflinching patience, and grace under—" He hesitated just long enough to be polite. "Scrutiny." He held out the silver plaque, hands slightly trembling, though whether from nerves or the plaque's unexpected weight was unclear. Alma accepted it silently, her gaze moving briefly around the room. Myrtle Blenkinsop stood stiffly by the tea urn, resplendent in a mauve blouse that signaled both contrition and defiance. Miss Maplecroft lingered near the biscuit tray, eyes fixed on the linoleum. Mrs. Carruthers was notably absent, though someone claimed she'd been struck down with sinus trouble and had sent her regrets through a cousin. "I thank you," Alma said softly, but clearly. "I accept this not as an honor, but as a reminder. A reminder that serving a town isn't about being right or admired. It's about being present and staying present even when people stop looking." She sat again, placing the plaque gently on her lap, and resumed stirring her tea. Later that afternoon, Inspector Purbright found himself walking back toward the river path. The mist had lifted, replaced by the mild warmth of a late spring sun. He was not on duty, not precisely. But there was something about unfinished stories that refused to let him stay at his desk. Sergeant Love caught up with him halfway down the footbridge. "Thought you might be here," Love said, out of breath. "You always get philosophical after a case wraps." "Philosophical, Sergeant, or simply quiet?" "Both," Love admitted. "It's been a strange one, hasn't it?" "They always are," Purbright said. "But this was more Flaxborough than usual." Love fell into step beside him. "Ivy Langton's resigning from the vicarage," he said after a moment, "going back to Dorking. Said she'll miss the church bells and the gossip. Not necessarily in that order. She'll land well," Purbright said. "She's learned a great deal about people here, and about herself." "And Carruthers?" "No formal charges." Alma declined to pursue it. She said the town's memory would be enough punishment. Love smirked. "She's not wrong." They walked in companionable silence, the kind shared by people who've seen a community turned inside out and somehow stitched back together without bloodshed. At the bridge's edge, Purbright paused. "There's something instructive in this," he said. "A reminder that most crimes in Flaxborough aren't about greed or desperation. They're about visibility, about not wanting to be overlooked." Love nodded. "The brooch was just a shiny excuse?" "A symbol," Purbright agreed. "One that made everyone look in the mirror, and some didn't like what they saw." Love leaned on the railing. "You think Alma'll keep that plaque?" "Of course," Purbright said, "but not where anyone will see it." From the other side of the river, the church bell rang again, a single chime. The sound carried clearly across the water, calm, measured, and unhurried. Purbright turned. "Well, Sergeant?" "Back to the station. There's always something new about to go missing." Love sighed. "Do you think the next case will involve less embroidery and fewer scones?" "One can hope," Purbright said dryly. "But I wouldn't bet against the scones." And with that, they crossed the bridge, their footsteps slow but certain. Two figures retreating from the theater of small-town drama, ready once again for the quiet business of watching everything unfold from the wings.